thanks very much for doing this. This novel is set in a very particular year, but it's also, I think, set in a very particular place, which is not Ireland as much as Donegal, and not Donegal as much as a particular part of Donegal. So I just wonder, that idea then of establishing a place, how do you do that? And I think one of the really fascinating ways you do that in this book is by not going over and over it, not telling us over and over, exactly where we are. And also that the voices in the book are not given a particular regional flavor. You just take it as their dialogue is their sort of natural dialogue, without you saying, oh, it has a Donegal inflection of a particular sort. And then in section after section, we hear this. So I just wonder if you could start. I think that idea is really important in Ireland at the moment, where it isn't as though writers are writing about Ireland as much as putting a flag up over a very particular set of towns or villages with a very particular emotional weather. And I just wonder if you could start by maybe talking about your own particular place and your own particular use of the place in this book.
Yeah, well, which
may not be the same thing.
Yeah, I am from Killybegs in County Donegal, which is a very particular part of the world. It was a thriving fishing port at this particular time, and that created its own energy and dynamics. It was a town. I guess it's like about the particular and the universal. And I suppose there are towns like this all over the world where they have some natural resource like oil, and that creates a great deal of wealth within a town, but also a great deal of disparity. And of course, this is great tension for fiction. And yeah, that was 1994. I suppose Ireland joining the EU in the 70s had created a huge amount of investment in the fishing industry and had built up this particular enclave in this very particular part of the world at a time when the rest of the country wasn't thriving economically.
And I think you have a sense also of who owns what, but also of sudden money coming in. For example, if the fishing season is very good, there can be a lot of cash wandering around.
Yeah, it felt like in a funny way, quite a glamorous place to grow up, or at least there was a great deal of energy, a very cash-rich town, a very cash-rich community. Yeah.
And the particular moment is important because it's in certain ways a very conservative place. But it's got funny moments, the conservatism. For example, the big change, if you're looking for a big change in this book, is that one of the local politicians, instead of being bullied by the bishop and told what he should do with his life or do with his vote by the bishop, he goes to see the bishop to tell the bishop what he wants the bishop to do. In other words, suddenly a layman can bully a bishop. I wonder if a decade earlier a layman would have been able to do that. It's a great moment where you presume the bishop is going to start bullying him about the divorce referendum, but actually there's something much more interesting going on.
And, well, 10 years earlier, they had another divorce referendum that was categorically defeated. So there is a sense that something is shifting and something is changing. And James, the character you mentioned, who is a politician and who is one of the only characters who is aware at this point that a referendum might be about to take place, knows that there's a shift happening.
Is the first referendum, divorce referendum, that a woman voting for divorce is like a turkey voting for Christmas? and then the second one, which you mentioned the slogan here, hello divorce, goodbye dad.
Yeah. And I thought so I had to do a bit of research. I was 10 years old when this book is set. And I have a friend who's an expert in family law. She's a barrister, and I got her to do a bit of research on my behalf. And she went to the law library, and she was very kindly took photographs of books and sent me along to help answer my questions. And one of the interesting nuggets of information that she came up with was that the government's great fear at this time in 1994 and 1995 was that if they legalized divorce, men would be divorcing their annoying wives in droves. And it was exactly the opposite that happened, that the majority of applications were from women when the time came. Yeah.
I mean, it was a curious business. I was coming in, I was stuck in RT something, and there was young politician who later became Taoiseach, and on the way into town, he just gave me a lift. He was driving, and I said to him, you got to get this divorce thing over. Just get it over with and then get on with other things. And he looked at me and said, no. He said, you couldn't have that. Sure, fellas would just leave the missus. And there was that idea somehow that these marriages were stuck together by something, like law rather than by love. And it was a curious phenomenon, wasn't it?
And also, I think, like, as you say, you just need to get this divorce thing over and done with. There was a sense in the government at the time they did just need to get this divorce thing over and done with. It was embarrassing to have joined the European Union and for these laws to still be in place. And then the law only passed by the difference was less than 1%.
Yeah.
I often wonder if they fluffed the numbers. It's like,
maybe, but anyway, let's not go into that.
Yeah.
If you're a novelist writing about this, then you have a really interesting story, because once this is over, once this referendum is over, meaning everything can be then regulated. In other words, if a couple is splitting up, you can go to law, work out access to the children, work out the entire system. But before this, it was for a novelist, you got a terrible untidiness where no one is sure who gets access to the children. And this is a really important part of this story, that Colette and her husband can actually have such an argument with each other that she does not have access to the children, and her efforts to get access, especially to her son Carl, it really is torturous and creates a lot of difficulty for her. And you feel that at the base of her trouble is this idea that nothing is regulated in the breakup of her marriage. And for a novelist, this is a gift, because you can then start unpicking the untidinesses and start seeing how emotional life can be so disturbed by public life. So in the creation of her, you have, it's not exactly a gift to you, but it's a moment where you can really unpick what's happening to her, whereas it is both private and deeply private for her, but also it's public.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't set out to write a book about the divorce referendum. That was never my intention, or even to really go into a great deal of detail or depth about that. But certainly when I was thinking of when to set this book, that it did add an extra layer of tension and dynamism to the plot, to have people in a situation where they cannot get out of it. The same options aren't available to them as they are now. And the point that you make about Colette being denied access to her children, I went back and forth a lot about that. I was like, thinking about the Ireland of the time, and there was actually very few men who would have been so devoted to their children at that particular time that they would have jettisoned their wife. And I had to construct the character of Sean in a very particular way, that he has the power to do it. He has the finances to have someone to look after his children full time without his wife there. And he was also someone who was devoted to his wife and to his children, and who is really smarting from the hurt of Colette's betrayal in that scenario. So to actually make it believable that he would behave in this way.
Yeah, and I think you also create the idea that not far away is a town where she can sort of be herself, where if she goes, she can meet Carl, and then of course, it's Christmas week. Somebody else is shopping in the same town. Somebody else sees them. That whole idea of the shopping centre as an anonymous place. But actually, it's not anonymous. Like if you're in Enniscorthy, you could try Waterford. If you're in Monaghan, you could try Enniskillen. And just think, nobody will know me there. And then suddenly, no, that's where everyone has gone that week. And it's the exact wrong place to go.
Yeah, I mean, they even tried to go to Northern Ireland to create a diversion and to be in a place where they might...
Is that Enniskillen?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that you think Enniskillen. Why would anyone go to Enniskillen? Well,
Yeah, and they're all going there for the good shopping. Yeah. And Christmas week. That was a really fun scene to write, the scene in the shopping centre with Anne, because it's a multi-perspectival narrative.
Just explain Anne.
Anne is Colette's husband, Sean. They are separated, not legally separated, but separated. And he has begun a new relationship with a woman from the town who is a waitress in the hotel. And she is as I think Izzy says this, one of the characters, she's as different from Colette as it is possible to be. And perhaps this is exactly why Sean has chosen her. And she is trying to navigate and negotiate this new relationship that she is in with this man who is much more sophisticated and well off than she is. And what I also find interesting is Colette has gone off and tried to have a new relationship. Sean has started a new relationship and everyone in the town's really happy for him. but with Colette there, like, she is the Scarlet Woman. Yeah. And Anne goes to Enniskillen to try and get some nice clothes for Sean's kids as Christmas presents. And really the decision that she makes and the things that she sees in that moment in the shopping centre is the energy that the whole narrative hinges upon. And there are multi-perspectives in the book, and I made rules about how I would occupy those voices, and one person couldn't hold the perspective for consecutive chapters. They had to be interspliced, and they had to hold the narrative perspective more than once. Whatever they did had to matter, and it had to move the narrative forward. Apart from Anne, she's dead centre of the book, and everything hinges on her. And it's actually kind of an irony, really, because actually she's someone in life who's been very downtrodden and hasn't had a lot of agency. And that is also part of the reason why she makes the decisions that she does.
I think with any good novel, the first question you ask is, or maybe the second, but is, what if you were going into Greek mythology, if you were looking for the origin of the story in some place where the source is very deep in the European tradition, what is this novel? Where do we position this novel in that? And I think every story, there's so many stories about someone returns who has been away. So you just start with that. So you have, it doesn't matter, it could be a Greek island, it could be even Dublin, it could be London. Someone has been away and returns. And in her being away, she has changed. And she represents danger, because not only is she, as you say, a scarlet woman, in the sense that there is a sort of a sexual aura about her that is, is bewildering or is in some way dangerous, but also she's a poet. So she comes back with this power because, of course, she starts a workshop. And it's interesting who goes to her workshop, including, for example, Izzy goes to her workshop. But there's also the sense that various women in the town gather, including there's someone who, is he an ex-schoolmaster?
A doctor.
Yeah, sorry, doctor. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm wrong. The ex-doctor, who, of course, cannot stop talking like a doctor. And then there's someone who cannot stop talking about themselves. But in the middle of all this is a sense of disruption, that this evening is not the bridge. Bridge gets mentioned. There are other things people do. They have dinners with each other, they have bridge. But this idea of self-exploration through her writing workshop offers disruption. So Colette, first of all, she rents the house. The house can be seen from various places. She walks into the town 3 miles rather than drive. So there's a whole sense of her, no matter what she does, she's being watched. But it isn't just she's not an outsider because she's from the place, or at least she's got her children and her husband in the place, but she represents her homecoming gives you the energy to start the book.
It is, yeah, it's a classic.
Oh, sorry, one more thing. One more thing. The priest, there's a priest who's new, and he wants to do new things, and he allows her to be on the altar to read, to read one of the, so that you can just imagine the whole town is watching. Who is up on the altar at this very moment? Colette. Yeah. And that's another moment where you feel that great disruption has taken place to the order of before.
Yeah, everyone is horrified. Colette is back. It is a classic Wanderer Returns tale. And yes, she does cause disruption. She sets up this creative writing workshop, which Izzy attends purely to annoy her husband and also to get out of the house. But she does go because she knows that her husband, who's a politician, who's horrified of anyone knowing anything about their business, will imagine that she is writing poems about him on a daily basis and reading them to the assembled crowd. And she's great like that. She's not a wallflower. She definitely tries to be as disruptive as she can within the power that she has. And then there's another woman at the creative writing workshop who only attends for the first night. And there was a thing that I was trying to do when I was writing the book, which was to represents as many different versions of the kinds of marriages that there were at that particular time. And I kept writing and writing and writing, and I thought I would go back and delete them. And actually, it felt important to even include this woman who attends the creative writing workshop for one night. And when Izzy sees her walk in, she goes, I know her. Her husband's rich. He has lots of affairs. I saw him in a bar with a woman once. And this woman is given a creative writing exercise. Something cleaves open something inside her, and she weeps to such an extent that she has to flee the room. And Colette says she'll be back, but Izzy knows that she won't. And there are a few other sort of glimpses that we get of lives like that that look into the different kinds of marriages.
So let's go back to the three marriages. Mm-hmm. Could you just give us who are the three couples in the book?
Yeah. Izzy is married to a TD called James, and I think the question surrounding their marriage is if she will stay, and the question she is asking herself all the time is this good enough? Is this just good enough to make work? Is it kind of crossing the line for it to be okay for me to survive it? But in a very literal sense, we have a woman who is fighting for survival called Dolores, and she's married to Donal, and she is in an abusive marriage with Donal. There's a lot of coercive control. And then there is Colette, who has gone to Dublin, has pursued a relationship with a married man, and she has returned to try and reclaim her old life with her husband, Sean. And we're wondering if she'll get it back.
Yeah. I mean, I think the question is not, who is this based on, or are there couples like this who you know? I mean, I think this would be a ridiculous question to ask. But the question is then, how do you build three different couples? And especially with the women, how do you give them different lives? And in a way, different possibilities of outcome? I mean, in other words, that it isn't as though all three are headed for divorce. But nonetheless, there's a sense of that something has gone wrong with all three marriages. Well,
I've always enjoyed reading books with complex, quote unquote, difficult central female characters. People that other people in a community might say, oh, so-and-so is a nightmare, but that other people might adore and their feelings might attach to really fiercely. And that was Izzy. And then Colette really arose as a projection of Izzy's greatest fears and desires writ large. Colette is everything that she would like to be and is terrified of becoming. She is sophisticated in a way that Izzy is not. She is rich on a scale that Izzy is not. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't know Dolores very well when I started the book. And one of the great joys and pleasures of writing the book was developing her character and getting to know her and seeing her come into her own over the course of the story.
I mean, they're important in the story because they're the ones, first of all, who rent the summer cottage or the summer bungalow. They can. It's free in the winter, so it can be rented to Colette. It gives Colette somewhere to live where everyone can see her, but it also gives them funny access to her, or at least they can see her window, they can watch her, they know where she is.
Yeah, she's very vulnerable. Yeah, she's a woman on her own in a vulnerable situation.
Izzy and her husband are having a particularly bad time.
Yes, they are. And one of the things that they do during that bad time is they make fun of Colette. And they like to sort of bond over one of the jokes that they repeat is, oh, that's what poets do, you know. When Colette is living in this cottage, Izzy says, oh, does that cottage even have running water? And her husband says, no, it doesn't. She washes out of a barrel.
Yeah, there's stuff she washes out of a barrel.
You know, and that these are the kind of jokes that they make about Colette and that they bond over, which is another sort of symptom of Colette's vulnerability within this parish. She's very well liked, but also the butt of a joke. She is dangerous. She is unknown, and is perceived as having a great deal of sexual power, but isn't aware of that herself.
Right. Let's talk about the children a bit. There's an image of one of the boys. It's a really, I don't know if anyone else found a very powerful image of just slowly winding bits of hair around his finger, and then she sees that he's beginning to pull his own hair out. I found that very powerful.
I was interested in the ways that the characters had become so embroiled in the fights that they were having with each other, as in the couples, the spouses, that the children were almost being forgotten about to some degree. And it only occurs to Izzy that the hostility at home might be causing any problems for her son when she hears her friend Margaret Brennan talk about her son's psychological problems. And there is the sense with Izzy that she is so caught up in the drama of her marriage that she's consumed by that.
Did you begin the book with these three couples?
I began with Izzy and Colette and their marriages.
Right.
And I didn't quite know. Donal and Dolores were there as well. I didn't know they were going to play quite such an integral role. I think I knew what was going to happen for the first 3 quarters of the book, and then the final quarter was a discovery.
Talk to me about the priest.
Yeah. So I was interested in creating a character, who hadn't just been dropped to the seminary by his parents when he was of a certain age, who'd actually had a life outside of the seminary. And also because I think to some degree...
He was a cop. He
was a guard, sorry. Yeah, he was a guard for years, and then he got the call.
Yeah.
Izzy... Also, I think part of the reason he is so appealing to Izzy is because he is a version of her husband who will listen to her. And I think what's important about Izzy and James's marriage is that she is someone who wants to make it work. She's not going to put up with any nonsense, but she does want to make it work. And interesting that she chooses someone who's probably not going to upset the sexual fidelity of her marriage. And also it's interesting that despite the fact that he's relatively progressive for a priest of this time, he's still circumscribed by certain rules. He will never, for example, tell Izzy, oh yeah, you should get a divorce. That's not a conversation they're ever going to have.
There's a funny moment where she tries to get him to more or less tell her or intimate what he's heard in confession.
Yeah.
He's not going there either. He's not going, but he is very kind, isn't he?
Well, yes. She tries to get him to intimate what he's heard in confession, and he does give her an indication without... Yeah,
but he doesn't say.
No, he doesn't say it. He gets around the rules. Yeah.
I met you 20 years ago, and you were a student at Trinity College, and you just very kindly invited me to come down to Trinity and give a talk. And you've been away a lot since then. So one of the things that happened with Irish writers going away is we best know through James Joyce's Dubliners, where he writes all these mean stories about people in Dublin. And then when he finally realizes, oh my God, I've lost Dublin, I'm in Trieste. What do I remember most? What do I love most? It's coming to Christmas. Oh, the hospitality that my mother's aunt, the big party they had, the way everybody was so animated. Why don't I write that as well as the other stories? So what I'm wondering is just a number of things that are not in the novel. You don't do big Donegal nights out drinking. You don't have people driving fast through little country roads. You don't have people out on the trawlers. You don't have big nights singing. All the things that people might associate with if you were living in Berlin, as where you live now, or London, where you've lived before, and you started thinking about home, that you didn't get nostalgic for those sort of obvious things that you could put into a Donegal novel, that you actually focused on something much tougher.
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time living away from home before I felt comfortable writing about it. I lived in London for 9 years in my 20s, and I worked in art galleries and worked in the art world, and I think I thought that I was supposed to write something about that because it was relatively glamorous, and I wrote a terrible book. And it came out of an agenda to make some worth out of, I thought my 20s had to count for something. Yeah. And then I went back and I did an MA at UEA, and I started for the first time, maybe when I was 30, to write short stories about Donegal, about back home. And I suppose maybe, my experience hadn't been, my childhood experiences hadn't been what you describe as the things that might be characteristic of Donegal. I'm very interested in the domestic and really the ways in which women's lives were held to a different set of rules and standards. However, I grew up around women who were very powerful in their own way and dynamic and excellent storytellers and funny. And so it was neither, my experience was that they were circumscribed by a different set of rules, but also that they were always trying to push back against those strictures.
And in the novel, then, your job is to get the men to, for example, Colette's husband.
Yes.
He is intensely loyal to the children.
Yes.
So, it isn't as though all of the men are just useless or bullies, although they can be bullying and they can be useless. But they do have other characteristics.
Yes, and even with someone like Donal, who is vile, I was also not interested in just creating someone who was bad the whole way through, or at least who had no reason for his resentments. And yeah, I mean, it's really funny. In 1995 in Donegal, when I think back to that particular time, I was like 10, 11 years old. The women are very vividly drawn to me. At that time, it felt like every man over 50 looked the same. So in my head, it's like James and Sean and Father Brian. They could almost meld together in terms of their physical attributes. And perhaps it became very important then to actually make them very distinct characters.
You mean if you went upstairs, women were talking in a very vivid way that was memorable? If you went downstairs, there could be three men, your father, your uncle, and your brother, sitting talking about sport and just grumpy and saying, yeah.
Talking about how long it took them to drive from one place to another and what route they took, yeah. And how, like I was like, oh yeah, I went that way, that was 5 minutes shorter. That was generally the chat, yeah.
I think you're very careful in the book, and I think it's remarkable, and it's one of the great dramas of the book, that you don't suggest that outside forces are controlling these people or damaging them. It's not as though the church is at them, or even the gossip of the town is mild compared to the pressures that each couple has within their own relationship. And you allow that to actually boil, to go cold again, to have its own rules and dramas, but it's not as though you're talking about this deeply repressed society, as much as each repression being different, and indeed each liberation.
And, Izzy is someone who, she's ambitious. She wants things for herself. She wants more power within her own life, but she wants more financial independence and gain. And over the course of the book, she learns to use her husband's political power to get what she wants as well. She's not an innocent in all of this by any stretch of the imagination. And it does create a huge tension between her and James. I mean, they have some, I hope, spectacular fights. That was the plan anyway.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Oh, no, the fights are great. But I suppose what I'm thinking about is that if I was talking about the idea, the first thing being a gift to a novelist, when there are no rules governing how a marriage breaks up. So since it isn't regulated, then you can dramatize all the different ways it plays out. But the second one is, if you take the rules away, for example, no one has any problem, especially the men, but also, also Colette, about the sexual rules. It is as though the power of the church has waned or disappeared, and the power of the society to control people has disappeared. So what you get are three couples attempting to deal with one another in a place where the rules are not newly made, but the old ones are gone. And so they're in a strange vacuum about what are the rules that govern relationships now in an Ireland that's really changing.
Yeah, but I think the most important thing is that it wasn't about playing by the rules. It was about being seen to play by the rules, that the two things could exist at the same time. You could be having an affair, but as long as you were showing up at Mass on a Sunday and bouncing a child on your knee and smiling, there was no end to what you could actually get away with. You had to be, that there was some allowance for two things to exist at once, I think.
Yeah, but my sense is that the parents of these 6 people would not have felt the same sort of freedoms, or indeed the ability to be treacherous in the same way. That in other words, was the sense of the older generation, and it's fascinating in this book, you don't give us the sense of these people's parents operating as controlling or as nurturing or as nourishing. It's simply that these couples have been almost left to their own devices, not only by the church, not only by the community, but also by the older generation.
Yeah, and they are also, they have socially advanced so much from their parents. They are much wealthier than their parents would have been. And that creates its own vices.
Yeah. But what I'm interested in then is the energy you can get in a novel by taking out all of those regulations and giving each household a lot of dramatic autonomy, where what happens between the in other words, who is to blame? In other words, you can't say, "Oh, this is a novel to show what an awful place Ireland was for these people." But you can't say that now. So what you do now is you show people where the rules are not newly made, so they're not exactly breaking them. So it just gives them a lot of energy. It gives them a lot of autonomy. I think it makes the reader really become fascinated by them because they can really do anything they like.
And they do sometimes, yeah.
I suppose the question is, was there a moment where you felt, should I bring in the bishop and make a big sermon? Or should I have some further way of regulating this world?
Yeah, no, the scene with the bishop and James, I'd always known was going to happen. That was always there. And also because James is a politician who is seen as playing by the rules. One thing he is recognized for is being honest and towing the party line. And then for him to go to the bishop to do this thing, which is would be seen as slightly underhand, shows how truly bothered he is by this priest's infringement in his life and the way in which he has infiltrated his marriage. This has troubled him a very great deal.
And the priest's infiltration of his marriage is the priest has started to listen to his wife when she talks.
Yeah.
And pay attention to her.
Yeah, exactly. And he also talks about, Father Brian, he talks a lot about confession and how, how in an Irish town, especially in a very small town, the priest often knows who's in the confession box. It's not really an anonymous act, as you can recognize someone's voice. I remember sometimes the priest would stick his head out of the confession box to see who was still waiting, to see who was waiting to come in. It's like, oh, there's 5 left. And of course he knows who's there. But he begins to recognize that what people are telling him in the confession box is not really the sin that they want to reveal. It's what they want him to know about their spouse. So Dolores and Izzy, for example, tell him things about James and Donal because they want him to know their husbands are not good men, or at least they're not the upstanding citizens that they might be perceived to be.
I suppose one of the big changes, besides the fact that confession is gone, it seems so strange, it's so hard to explain to somebody now even, that there were moments in living memory when a writer would arrive in a place where the writer belonged. Edna O'Brien, for example, in Clare, or John McGahern in Leitrim, and where there was a sense of people being immensely uncomfortable about stories being written, about their lives, or even just things being explored, or things that are meant to be private appearing in a book. But my feeling is with this book that there's a new freedom that you have won to actually write about these lives without feeling that when you went home to Killybegs, that you wouldn't be welcome at the Chipper, or that you went into the pub, people would say, well, no one's talking to you, everyone hates you. That there's that freedom, I think, is a big new thing here, that instead of saying, oh my God, it must be hard for you to go home to Killybegs with this book, but it's almost as though this is what you're expected to do, that these stories must be told, that there's a much more open response to them. Is that right?
Well, let's see. I think when I sat down to write this book first, I was almost waiting for someone to give me permission to do it. I went back and forth for a long time about what you could say, what you couldn't say. And also at that time, I started it in 2018. 1994 didn't seem that long ago. And now it's a historical novel, apparently.
Yeah.
But you work on something for so long, and it doesn't begin to work until it is fiction, until you are entirely making it up. If you're trying to do anything to it that it adheres too closely to real life, it actually doesn't function. And so you actually go through a process of creating what you hope is a carefully paced narrative, plot, and story, and then come out the other end and you go, oh God, I'm so glad that no one I know, that none of these things have happened to anyone that I know. Yeah. And that anyway, fears about having like told secrets of home don't apply anymore at that stage.
But I think the remarkable thing about the book, which is really what I'm talking about, is the levels of sympathy you have for the 6 characters, for the 3 couples. I mean, despite everything, there's a level not of, attempting to judge them or attempt to give the reader information about them, but just simply to see them completely and to see them acting in the shadows and acting in the light and to see their motives as ambiguous. And certainly there's a great sympathy for the children as well. So that I think there's a sense of you, not only the society being more open in a way to a book like this, but you being more open to the society, being able not to make judgments or, offer everyone your opinion of who these people are, but actually offer the world from their perspective. And I think this matter you raised at the beginning of that it's not told from one perspective. It's not written in the first person. That each time one part of the story is told, then another character gets the story from his perspective. And so that constant way of seeing things in different ways is a sort of openness, which I think makes a very big difference to the reader and gives the book a sort of, not only a sort of energy, but a way of seeing the world which I think any reader will I think, respond to. So congratulations, and I mean, it's a wonderful book. Thank you very much, and thank you very much everyone for coming. Thanks to the Arts Council, and thanks to the library.